The Tempest Clock, an altered reality's original story. You hear it first if you're lucky, the low thrum in the bones that comes before the water goes black. It's not thunder and it's not a drum, though I've told myself both to feel braver. It's a tide you can't chart, a heartbeat that isn't yours. When it starts, I've got minutes, sometimes less. Name's Elias, Vane. They called me Blackwater after the first time the sea rose around my ship and took the colour of ink. I didn't choose the name. Like most curses, it chose me. You're staring over my shoulder. Aye, you feel it too. The way the lantern flame fattens and thins to a rhythm your head can't count. Don't worry. If the tide takes me while I'm speaking, it won't take you. Not unless you touch the thing wrapped in sailcloth under my coat. Don't. You see the green on the edges? That's not only brass going sour, that's time rust. Sit, have your drink. Hear a sinner's account. I captained the Maelstrom Queen, 80 guns and a crew who'd follow me through hell if I promised them silver on the far side. I kept my oaths until the day I stole the wrong shine. We'd heard of an island that slid on and off charts like a fish flashing beneath the surface. Grimhold, a spine of slate standing where there was nothing, a crooked tower on its summit like a finger jabbing at God. We came on in fog as thick as tar. You could smell the rock, seaweed, bird dung, iron. Gulls screeched and squabbled overhead like ghosts arguing about the living. I led 20 men up the carved steps. Hemp lines on our waists, salt crystals cut in the lips. The door at the top was old iron that had forgotten how to rust. I should have turned back when it opened before we knocked. He stood in the gap with a lamp guttering in one hand. Old, yes, but there was a kind of ship's rope toughness left in him, the sort a gale can't quite untwist. His eyes were dark and deep set, like someone had pressed marbles into frost-bitten sockets, and they'd sunk there, still and watchful. You'll take it, he said, before any of us opened our mouths. You'll think you earned it by blood. You'll be wrong. Out of the way, old man, I told him, because a captain mustn't blink when a storm looks him in the face. We've no interest in your sermons, only your gold. He smiled like a wound being stitched. No gold here, only the clock. A laugh rose out of my men. What's a clock to sailors? Called Strake, my boatswain, teeth like pebbles. We carry time in the wind. Take it if you must, the old man said, but you must not break it. And when the storm comes, when it truly comes, do not look at the stars. They won't be yours anymore. We pushed him aside. The tower's stones sweated damp as we climbed. In the topmost room, no bigger than a galley's larder, on a shelf cut into the wall, in a cradle of rope like a babe at prayer, sat a brass clock. Not a church bell clock, not a captain's table clock. A squat, intricate thing whose face had no numbers I knew. Behind glass, the hands turned slow, but the brass guts visible at its back, whirred and whispered with a life of their own. No keyhole, no weight cords, no pendulum. It hummed faint as something breathing in its sleep. I hated it on sight. I wanted it more for that. You know that want, the kind that's part spite. No, be grateful. We wrapped it in sailcloth. We did not bind the old man. He stood at the door with the night breeze fingering his beard. When the storm comes, he said again, looking only at me, don't look up. I looked up. Of course I did. Sailors make a sport of daring fate. The stars above the tower seemed ordinary, cold and freckled and far. I spit, because bravado warms the chest as well as rum. Keep your sky, I told him. I'll have your relic. We lowered by lines to the boats, oars whispering. The Queen welcomed us with her old groan and broad deck, pitch black in the seams, salt scurf white on the rails. the smell of tar and rope and powder so familiar I could taste it. We were 3 cables off Grimhold when wind sprinted at us from nowhere, hard as a slap. A grey belly rose on the water. "Storm," Straight grunted, as if naming a thing makes it civil. Then the King's frigate eased out of the fog like a pewter carving come to life, all neat lines and smirking cannon mouths. She had no right to be there. The fog had no right to part. Fate does not care for rights. We swung broadside and gave her our teeth. Her first volley stitched foam across our bows. Our second tore a grin from her waist. I felt that hot, thin joy you get only when death is busy somewhere else. The third exchange, hers, not ours, thumped the stern with the sound of God hitting the hull with a palm, and men shouted that the captain's cabin had taken it. The thrum began. Don't think thunder. Think the pulse in your mouth after a blow. Think the long creak of a hull when too much weight shifts. It came up through my boots and along the meat of my legs. A vibration not in the wood, but in the seconds themselves, as if time had been a tight line, and now something big had taken the hook. We ran aft. The cabin door was a broken jaw. Inside, the brass clock lay on the floor, with its glass spidered and its face cocked sideways. It hadn't shattered so much as opened. Slits had split along its rim, fine as paper cuts, and from those slits, light leaked, the pale green of old depths where the sun never properly reaches. The hands spun, or maybe they were still, and it was the world stuttering around them. "Overboard!" I shouted, 'cause men say sensible things when they're scared. "Throw it!" The wind went away. All of it. The canvas slumped and the Queen rocked as if she'd suddenly forgotten what direction was. Water rose at the rails, not because of tide or wave or bowline, but because something under the keel had become heavier than it had been a breath ago. And the black came up. The black like spilled ink, slick and lightless and wrong. "Don't look at the stars," the old man had said. So I looked. They were not where they should be. Not one. The crew had all prayers at once. Saints, mothers, sinners they feared more than saints. The frigate's lights stretched into lines and then into nothing. The horizon shrugged. The compass spun like a drunk seeking a chair. I've fallen overboard in winter and felt the cold claw my heart. I've held the hand of a man with his thigh blown open and told him he'd see sunrise. Neither came near the horror of the moment when I understood the sky was not mine. You've never felt loneliness if you've never realised your constellations are strangers. We came out in sudden calm, sails fat again, as if they'd never been empty. No frigate, no fog. On the horizon, roofs the colour of terracotta, masts like forests, a harbour laced with smoke. The air carried spice, anise, pepper, and something like pitch but sweet. Men on the docks in draped cloth stared at us and crossed themselves in a way I'd never seen. Their boats had eyes painted on the prows. The sun was higher than it should have been. "Where?" whispered Cage, my gunner. "Captain, where?" I said the name of a port I knew. No one answered. I tried another tongue I'd learnt brokering with Barbary corsairs. Blank eyes. We were the monsters in someone else's story. We got water. We traded knives for dried fruit the colour of blood. A boy dipped his fingers in tar and drew the shape of a spiral on our deck and pointed at the wrapped clock and shook his head hard enough to hurt himself. Strake swatted his hand away. The boy fled as if we'd spit fire at him. The hum woke me that night, low as a cat's purr under the boards. I stood in the dark with the taste of brine and old copper on my tongue and felt it build. The sea went slick again. The stars slid on the black like minnows in a bucket. And then we were breathing diesel. Do you know that smell? oil and iron and something like blood left to warm in the sun. I didn't then. I knew it after. A forest of cranes along the shore like metal herons, hulls taller than steeples, ships with no canvas and names painted in block letters. Men in orange vests laughing into little boxes that talked back. A siren howled and a bird I'd never seen, white belly, silver wings, dragged a thunder's tail across the sky, and then was a dot, and then was gone. My crew shrank each jump. 2 swam for a pier and vanished into a century I couldn't read. One sat on the rail and recited the Lord's Prayer backward in a whisper until the Blackwater rose and took him without a splash, as if some ledge below had opened and he'd stepped neatly down. Strake stayed. He was stubborn as rope and hated the idea that a thing could unman him. When sleep came to him at last, it took him below, and sometime in the dark he walked into the cabin and opened the sailcloth and put his hands on the clock. We found him at dawn with his eyes gone the colour of the sea and a smile split ear to ear by his own teeth. He'd bitten his tongue to ribbons in the night. His palms were blistered white where brass had burned without heat. I learnt then not to touch it bare. I learned not to sleep close to it. I learned to watch its face in the dim, to see the way the hands sometimes didn't move, but the hours changed anyway, and I learned to read the marks inside. They weren't etched. They were cut, like someone had worried at the brass with the tip of a knife for a long time until the letters appeared. Some were symbols I didn't know, loops and hooks that made my eyes ache. But there were words I knew too, in English, in Latin, in a French that had a salt stink to it. Dates, places, a little sentence here and there like a man carving his voice into a cell wall. No more than a day. Don't look up, don't name them, return it to the shelf. The last cut, deepest of all, read, Grimhold, Day of Theft. I understood then nothing. I tell you that plain. Men in ballads see a riddle once and tear it open. Real men stare and don't even know which part of a thing to fear. I feared the thrum, so I tried to predict it. I began to feel it not in the boards but in me, the tiniest ache behind the left eye, the taste of iron, the way shadows developed edges. When I sensed it, I'd have the crew reef canvas and lash everything tight. After a while, there was no crew left to lash. After a while, I lashed myself. I met myself when the lamps were bright without flame. A bar with a mirror behind it that turned everything thin and flat. Glasses like clear shells. A smell of beer cleaner than any keg has a right to be. The men wore jackets sewn by machines. The women bared arms with drawings on them so precise I thought they'd been stamped on like coins. A song about a car played quietly, and I didn't know what a car was. He took a stool beside me without looking, as if he'd arranged to meet the shape of himself there years before. He was older by more than years. Some aging is a calendar, some is a tide. Deep grooves at the corners of his eyes like rope burns that had healed. A nick on the ear I knew I'd get some day. The scar across the palm where I'd once caught a falling knife. My mouth, my nose, my evil temper damped down to an ember. He slid something small on the bar between us. A coin. Brass. Not minted by any king or republic I'd ever heard of. The face had a pattern like waves caught mid-break. The back had the clock scratched into it by a man who cared more for the mark than the art. You can't keep it, he said, soft. The accent on his English had thinned. You can only return it. That's the nearest thing to winning. Return it where? I asked, though I knew before the question left my jaw. The shelf, he said, grim hold, the day we took it. I stared. The mirror behind the bar threw two of me back. We looked like brothers who'd had different seas. He kept his gaze on the glass as a ship does on a star. "You'll want to break it," he said. "You'll try, Elias. You'll hammer it. You'll drown it. You'll fire it red and quench it. It'll open more. That's all. Do not look at the stars. That's for your soul, not your head." "You're me," I said, because the mouth speaks truth when the mind's afraid to hold it. "I'm what you become if you wait too long to stop," he answered. "It's not witchcraft, though it might as well be. It's a clock tuned to a current, a tide that runs underneath time the way the ocean runs under us. Someone made it, found it, stole it. We were not first." "Who?" But the thrum had started, the tiniest quiver in the beer in his glass, as if a finger had flicked the surface from below. He smiled at me with pity I would never forgive. "You'll know when you put it back," he said, "and maybe you'll forgive me for letting you become me." He put his palm on mine. I felt his scar line up with my scar. For a heartbeat's heartbeat, the thrum stopped, as if we'd tricked it. Then it came doubled, and the world dragged its own weight behind it, and the bar stretched and the lamps drew lines, and I was alone with my beer and a coin. After that, I began to steer. Not like a helm steers a ship, not like plotting a course. More like a man who's learnt the shape of a river by falling in enough times that he can reach for a log before he scrapes his skull. I slept with the clock to my left because the hum leaned that way. I lashed it in its wrappings with wet line because the knot swelled and bit and would not slip. I listed the durations, an hour here, 10 there, a whole day once when the hum barely whispered and then came roaring like a train. What's a train? Later I learned. It's a long iron thing that believes it's a ship. I saw a sky the colour of old blood with 6 moons stacked like coins. I saw a fisherman in a leather cap in a coracle whose ribs were bone, not wood, and when he grinned his teeth had been filed. I saw a future where the ocean had become a farm, squares of it fenced and sown. The boats were not boats but beetles with shell backs that skittered without wake. I saw a whale whose back occasionally opened like a lid, because it was not a whale, but a thing men had built to pretend to be one, while it sucked secrets from cables on the seafloor. I came once to a harbour I knew by the smell before I saw the shore. Tar and pine sap and the oats my mother boiled toward the end of the month to make you think you weren't hungry. I stood offshore under a new moon and watched a boy run with a stick and make sparks on the stones and swear he'd be a captain. He had my legs and my shoulders, and when he tripped, he wiped his bloody palm on his shirt exactly as I always had. I thought to call out to him. The hum began before the thought was done. Good. I had not wanted to witness the look a boy gives a ghost with his own nose. The clock grew louder, or my head grew thinner. Either way, I knew there'd come a jump that would drop me not where time wanted, but where time had to. The marks had been telling me as much. The deep cut on the brass shone in any light. Grimhold, day of theft. We made our approach at dawn. Same fog, same teeth of rock showing and hiding like a jaw chewing. I say we, but by then my crew was rope and rat and shadow. The captain still says we, when the only we left is bones and a clock. I climbed alone. Same steps, same iron door, same goals, same smell of iron and rotting weed and guano and the sharp, thin sweetness you breathe in when two currents cross and don't like the look of each other. He stood there with the lamp. I had never in my years believed in fate until I saw that my own hands had grown into his. The rope-burned grooves, the scar on the ear, the way the beard had bleached from black to iron to frost. He was not merely me older, he was me, stretched thin by hours spent listening for a hum the world can't hear. His eyes were pits with tide lines in them. "You'll take it," he said, and I watched his mouth make the words before I heard them, and something in my skull tried to press through the bone to get out. "You," I said, my voice dirty with salt and sleep. "You'll think you earned it by blood," he went on, gentler now, as if speaking a spell you've rehearsed 1,000 times and still hope will somehow go differently. "You'll be wrong." My hand went to the sailcloth bundle under my coat. It was there. It was the same. It was different. The face behind the glass was cracked now where it hadn't been then. Wouldn't be then. And the hands twitched like the last movements in a dying crab. The hum was a tremor in my thumb. "You told me not to look up," I said. "I always do." He laughed once. It sounded like rope dragging over rock. "We always do." "Why?" I asked him. "What is it? Who made this thing?" "Men," he said, and that was the worst answer. Men with more time than sense. Or not men, depending on what you mean by that word. It doesn't matter. It's not a god. It's a current. A clock set to a current. "I met you," I said, "in a tavern with lamps that didn't burn. You gave me a coin." He nodded. It was all I had to give that would prove I was you and not a shape wearing your face. "I wanted to break it," I said. "Every time." "Every time," he agreed. "What happens if I don't bring it back?" I asked, though the ache behind my left eye already knew. He gestured and stepped back into the tower, and I followed because I am not brave so much as curious, and that is the vice that will drown a captain as surely as rum. The stair up was narrower than I remembered. Age does that to steps and men. In the top room the shelf waited in its niche. The cradle of rope looked freshly tarred. The air was cold. A bowl of brine sat on a peg table, still as a mirror. Beside it lay a small knife, the kind a surgeon uses to open the skin without tearing. He touched the bowl. "Salt holds a shape," he said. "I know," I said, though I hadn't, not like that. He picked up the knife and turned it so the light found the edge. "I put marks inside," he said. "At first because I was angry, then because I was lonely. Finally because I realised I needed to tell you, not you now, the you that was. The you who would come back to take the thing he stole and put it where it belonged. The marks are of no use to anyone but us. That is the curse and the mercy." I unwrapped the sailcloth. The clock sat in my hands like something recently awakened. Its hum steadied. The hands tried to be still. The glass showed my eyes, small and dark and tired. I could have pitched it from the tower and watched it shatter on the slate and felt a kind of joy so sharp it would have bled me. He watched me. He had at some point made peace with this moment in a way I never could. He had learned to let the tide take what it wanted and to tie his knots on the things the tide could not see. "You're him," I said, as if naming a storm makes it less wet. "You're the wizard." He shrugged. "Wizard is what men call sailors who come back with stories they can't swallow. I stacked books to hide the clock. I learned some tricks with salt and steel. I grew old waiting for me, that's all. And if I set it down," I asked, "what happens to me?" "You become me," he said. "If you run, you become me sooner and worse. If you smash it, you become no one at all, and the sea will take more than just us when it comes for the pieces. If you set it where it belongs, you will live out a story that doesn't end, but does close. There's a difference. You will have days that belong to a single sky. You will learn the hum like a man learns the creak of his own bones, and you will use it to keep the island on the map long enough to warn yourself." I stared at the niche. I thought of Strake's chewed tongue. I thought of the boy on the quay making sparks with a stick. I thought of the cranes like iron birds and the beetle boats and the sky with 6 moons and the future that farmed the sea and the past that cut its teeth. I thought of a bar mirror with two of me in it, and how the older one had eyes that pitied, and the younger one had hands that shook, and both of them were lying to each other because they had to. "If I set it," I said, "does the storm come for us again?" "It already has," he said, "and it will. We are the storm and the witness both." I set the clock on the rope cradle. The brass kissed hemp with a sound like a coin laid on wood. The hum rose, brightened, and then faded down into something like a cat snoring. I did not look up. I looked only at my hands, which shook as if I'd been in a gale, and at the way the glass face held a smear of salt from my thumb that made it look as if the sea were trapped behind it. Below on the stairs, men shouted. The door crashed. Boots on stone. The smell of rope and sweat and fear rising like steam. My men. Me. I moved to the door of the top room and stood where I had stood, where I would stand, where I was standing. I felt the shape of the words in my mouth and let them form because I had no right to steal them. You cannot cheat a tide by refusing to speak its name. "You'll take it," I said, to the man I've been and never stopped being. His eyes were my eyes, and they were quick and hot and full of the wrong kind of pride. "You'll think you earned it by blood. You'll be wrong." I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake at him and tell him to listen, to tell him he was me, to tell him to throw the clock into the sea, to flee, to kneel, to do anything but what I knew he'd do. He shoved me. Him shoved me. Time is a rope that will tangle if you stare at it too long, and my shoulder found the stone exactly where it had before. He moved to the shelf. He rapped the clock. He looked up because we always do. "When the storm comes," I said, and I tried to lace my voice with a pity that might feel like warning. "Don't look at the stars." He laughed. I hate that laugh. I love it. They went. Boots drummed down the steps. The iron door swallowed them. I listened to the thrum start in the stone. I waited until the sound was in me and outside me both, and then I sat in the corner with the bowl of brine and the little knife and the coin in my pocket, and I carved one more mark into the inside of the clock's back plate, because the hum had told me how to unlatch it clean without breaking anything. Grimhold, day of return. When the tide took them who were me, I kept still as a man in a storm does when he's learned his ship's limits. I waited for the thrum to settle. I waited until the gulls forgot I was a thing to watch. I waited until the lamp's flames softened, not into safety, but into ordinary danger. I made tea out of weed boiled in clean water. It tasted like the sea tastes when it wants you alive. Then I began my work. You think the old keepers of lighthouses went mad for loneliness? Some did. Most went mad because they learnt to hear the stones. A tower is a ship nailed to a cliff. It groans and sings and asks you to answer. I thought at first I'd spend my years shouting into wind and warning sailors off teeth. Then I learned the shape of the other current, the one the clock rode, and I spent my years warning one sailor off himself. I didn't become a wizard. I became a man who thinks too much about which moment is touching, which and where the tide might spill if you kick the wrong side of a bucket. Books came to me in ships that slipped off years and landed wrong. I learned enough not to be easy to fool. I learned a little of binding, a little of salt stubbornness, a little of how iron remembers. I learnt you can braid 3 hairs and not a day in the middle so it will not slip. I learnt how to keep the island's position steady enough that the same fog would come when it had to, that the same steps would find the same boots. I waited. I ate gull when the fish were shy. I talked to the clock like it was a man, and I apologised to it more than once because I knew it had been meant to do something grand, and I was using it as a leash. Sometimes the hum came and took me anyway. Sometimes I'd wake in a century with no shoreline and nothing but dust and sky, and the shapes of cities like teeth coming up out of gums. And then the black would rise, and I'd be sitting again with my bowl and my knife marking a little more on the inside face for a man who would not read it until he already knew. You're looking at the door. You feel it, don't you? The tiny trickle in the air, like cold sneaking along the floor. The lamp has gone from yellow to a colour there isn't a name for, because men don't usually need to name. The shape of fear, like takes when it's polite. It's starting. I'm not asking you to believe me. Belief is a thing people say when they want agreement. I don't need your agreement. I needed your witness, because a story told becomes heavier and stays put longer. That's a trick too. Wind can be captured by a tale. Storms remember names. If you see me elsewhere, if you find me on a quay in a city you haven't been born in yet, if you sit at a bar with mirrors and a man with my scar lays a coin by your elbow and asks you to watch a door, don't touch the clock. Don't look up when the sky moves like a school of fish. Tie your knots in what the tide can't see. The thrum is in my teeth now. The glass on the lamp has begun to sweat. The water in the jug is making those little rings you see when a big animal walks past in the dark beyond the fire. I'll be gone in breaths. What becomes of me after I set a thing where it belonged is this. I keep setting it there. That's the loop men write songs about, without knowing why the chorus needs that one chord in the middle to feel like it's still falling. I am not forgiven. I am not damned. I am a keeper. If you must pray for me, pray that the boy with the sparks on the key grows into a fool with enough courage to become an old man who can stand in a doorway and say the words a time or two more without hating the sound of his own voice. The tide's at the door. Don't look at the stars.